Okay, so for number 19, we have three functions. F of x is negative 3x, that's linear. G of x is absolute value of x minus 2, that's an absolute value. And then we have h of x equals 1 over x plus 1, which is a reciprocal function. Okay, so let's see if we can find these things. So make sure that you know how to read these. This is f minus h of 2. It's not 2 times f minus h. Okay, it's f minus h of 2. So in other words, I'm asking you to find f of 2 minus h of 2. And we can do that, right? We just plug the things into the f equation and the h equation and subtract them. So it's going to be negative 3 times 2 for the f of 2, and then minus h of 2, which would be 1 over 2 plus 1. So you end up getting negative 6 minus 1/3, which if you use your calculator, that ends up giving you negative 19 over 3. Okay. I wouldn't want to see you write like an answer with a bunch of 0.333s forever. I want you to make sure you change it to a fraction. So b, g times h of 3. So that is g of 3 times h of 3. Okay, so g of 3 looks like absolute value of 3 minus 2. And then we're going to multiply that times h of 3, which looks like 1 over 3 plus 1. So if you work that out, you get 1 times a fourth, which is just a fourth. I kind of purposely picked ones that maybe didn't come out with the most pleasant of answers so that you could practice with those, because if you can handle fractional answers, then you can handle more pleasant ones if I choose to do that on the test. So we're going to do g of negative 5 over h of negative 5. So g of negative 5 is going to look like negative 5 minus 2, absolute value, over 1 over negative 5 plus 1. Okay, so that's going to end up being 7 over negative 1/4. So way back in elementary school, we talked about that we can't divide by fractions, so we multiply by their reciprocals. Or you can use a calculator and make sure that you put a parentheses around the negative 1/4. But no matter how you do it, you should get negative 28. Okay, so you can't divide by a fraction, you have to multiply by its reciprocal instead. Remember that this little circle, open circle, means composition, so this actually means f of g of 5. Okay, and we talked about this in class, but remember we always start on the inside. In other words, tell me what g of 5 is first, and then I'll use that. So g of 5 is going to be the absolute value of 5 minus 2, which is 3. So what I really want then is f of that answer, f of 3. Okay, and then that would be just negative 3 times 3, which is negative 9. So remember, with composition of functions, you always start on the inside and work your way out. So g of f of 5 would be g of f of 5 like this. So we start on the inside, right? So we're not really quite ready to do the whole thing. We're going to work on the inside piece first. So off to the side or under it or something, I'm going to do negative 3 times 5, which is negative 15. And then what I want is g of negative 15. Okay, so notice I use this inside there. So g of negative 15, I just lost my g equation. There it is. So it'd be negative 15 minus 2, and then the absolute value of that. So we would get what's on the key, which is 17. Okay, so just remember with composition of functions, it'll help you on number 20 also. Remember that you always want to start with the inside first. So for number 20, we have m equals a linear function. We have n as a quadratic. We have q is a rational, or sorry, a reciprocal function. So for a, I just asked you to find n minus m of x, which is just n of x minus m of x, right? Just make sure you use parentheses. So it's actually going to be x squared minus 4x minus negative 4x. If this would have been the opposite, you would have needed to definitely have parentheses if you were doing m minus n. Okay, but at any rate, that changes to a plus, so you end up just getting x squared. Part B, I ask you to find m times q of x. So in other words, m of x times q of x. So we're just going to multiply these equations together so we get negative 4x times 1 over x minus 5. You can combine these, okay, but you cannot cancel x's out. If you're tempted to do that, remember you can only cancel x's out if there were an x in everything, and this 5 doesn't have one. Okay. By the way, if I also ask you on the test to find the domain, this would have a domain of negative infinity to infinity, right? The off limits x value here would be 5, right? So we would say everything except 5. So we would go negative infinity to 5, parentheses, and then parentheses 5 to infinity. Okay, so the more challenging ones are C and D. So notice I asked you to find m of n, okay? And sometimes it'll have the x and sometimes it won't, but that just means m of n of x. Okay, so we always, just like I said before, we start on the inside. So we're going to have m of whatever n was, which was x squared minus 4x. Okay, but then that's saying go to your m equation and stick that in, right? So in place of x, I'm going to have negative 4 times this parentheses instead. So we just end up distributing that negative 4, so we get negative 16x squared plus 16x. Okay, so let's contrast that to n of m of x. Okay, this is actually the more challenging direction to go. So we're going to start here. In other words, we're going to replace m of x with what we were given that it was, right? N was negative 4x. So if I want n of something, I go to my n equation and I replace every x with what's in the parentheses. So it's x squared minus 4 times x. And notice every time I said an x, I stuck in the negative x in its place. So this would be positive 16x squared, and this would be plus 16x. Okay, so notice we get something somewhat close, but it's not exact, so keep that in mind. Back up here, I think I see a mistake that I made, so I want to look at that again. So negative 4 times x. So let's make sure. The equation for m was negative 4. Yeah, something's wrong. Sorry about that. In other words, I don't really know why I put a 4 here. It's not supposed to be a 4 here. So this equation is just x squared minus 4x. So I started looking at my key and realizing that I put an extra 4 there. So this should just be negative 4. Okay, that would still be plus 16 because it's a negative 4 times a negative 4. So sorry about that. I just wrote the problem down wrong. All right, and then last but not least, we have a difference quotient problem. Now I told you on like the distance and midpoint problem that I would not be giving you those formulas, and I don't plan to, but I wouldn't ask you to memorize the difference quotient. So if I put a difference quotient problem on the test, I will give it to you. You'll just have to figure it out in pieces. Okay, so remember, we don't try to tackle the whole problem at once. We find f of x plus h first, because that's going to be the hardest thing to do. Okay, so f of x plus h is going to look like f with x plus h plugged in everywhere there's an x. So we practiced this already today. We just need to make sure we know how to FOIL. So this is something times itself. So I'm going to FOIL, and then I'm going to worry about the 3. So all I'm going to do in this next step is FOIL. If you FOIL, you get x squared plus 2xh plus h squared. Okay, notice I didn't do anything else in that step other than FOIL. Okay, make sure you can break down the FOIL, but I kind of combined the O and the I steps together. And then this negative 4 goes to both of these, but then the 3 goes to all 3 of these. So you get 3x squared plus 6xh plus 3h squared minus 4x minus 4h plus 9. Okay, so that's not my final answer, that's just this piece. Okay, so if I want the whole thing, now that I've done the most difficult part, I'm going to put the whole thing in. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to have a bunch of stuff over h. I'm trying to recreate this, right? Well, I just found that f of x plus h was this long thing. And then I need to subtract off f of x. Well, that was just what I was given originally. Okay, so if you've done a couple of these, you're going to notice a lot of similarities. It always kind of works the same way. You get pairs of things to cancel out, and then you look at what's left after that. Okay, so notice this minus sign is going to distribute to everything here. Okay, so I don't want to write this again, but just know this is going to be negative. This is going to be positive, and this is going to be negative, right? Which means 3x, take away 3x is 0. Negative 4x plus 4x is 0, because that changes to a plus. And then 9 minus 9, because that changes to a negative 9, is 0. So we end up with simply these terms left. Much better than where we started, right? Lots of things went away. 6 terms went away in the last step. Okay, and then notice here we have an h in everything. So if we cancel an h in everything, remembering that I still have one here, the final answer would be 6x plus 3h minus 4. So I know this is weird, but all you're being asked to do is subtract 2 functions and then divide them by h. Okay, it's just that it's a little tedious to do so. Okay, so really make sure you practice these questions and that you're really prepared for at least one of all the types of questions that I have on the review.